Most leaders think visibility is about being seen. It's not. Visibility is about who is trusted, who is referenced, and who is invited into the rooms where decisions are made. In today's world, authority no longer comes from titles alone or institutions deciding you're ready. It comes from how clearly, how consistently, and how credibly you position yourself in the global conversation. In this episode of the Authority Advantage podcast, I'm joined by Hazel for a direct strategic conversation about global visibility, not as exposure, but as power. We unpack how leaders convert experience into authority, how media platforms now function as positioning infrastructure, and why this moment right now presents a unique advantage for leaders, especially African women who choose to position themselves deliberately rather than wait to be discovered. If you've ever felt overlooked despite being capable, or sense that the rules of influence have changed but couldn't quite name how, this conversation will give you clarity. So let's get into it. Hazel Namponya is a Pan-African media entrepreneur, storyteller, and strategic communicator who believes deeply in the power of authentic storytelling. To her, stories are not just content. They're tools that can shift mindsets, question broken systems, and sometimes quietly change the world. She is the co-founder of Right Words Create, a purpose-driven media, communications, and publishing company built on a simple belief: only we can change the narrative of our continent and people. Hazel is the creative mind behind Maua Bio magazine, a biographical storytelling platform that celebrates African women beyond titles, trends, and headlines. She also leads the Maua Foundation, extending this work beyond the continent to women in low and middle income countries, with a strong focus on nurturing visionary thinking, vulnerability, voice, visibility, and value in women's leadership. In addition, Hazel co-leads Fence Africa, formerly Elevation News, a digital African platform committed to telling balanced, truthful stories about the continent, and Chorus Revival, a men's mental health and leadership initiative, creating space for conversations that are often avoided or silenced. She also serves on an advisory board, contributing strategic insight in the education space. At her core, Hazel is driven by a quiet but stubborn conviction. Africa is not a single story, and it never has been. Through her work, she continues to protect, reclaim, and reimagine African narratives, one story at a time. Hazel Namponya, welcome to the Authority Advantage podcast.
Thank you, Modesta. I'm so excited and I'm so looking forward to this conversation. It's really been burning in my spirit. And thank you for the invitation.
So my first question to you as a woman leader is, how did you get here?
Oh, that's a loaded question. How I got here was a lot of mistakes, a lot of flops, but eventually I kind of learned the ropes. And me getting into the media space was actually literally by accident. In the media and publishing space, I remember a number of years ago, almost 20 years ago, I was in standby editing for somebody in an organization I was working for. And what I did was I edited it was a document that was going to Parliament. But when it came back from my boss, it was so terrible because there were so many red changes. And I thought, oh my God, I am the worst writer ever. But after I then had a chat with my previous boss, she says to me, that was the best report ever written. I was just changing the structure. And this was my first time actually doing this report. And I think that's the first time I realized, okay, I have a thing for writing. I've always had it, but I've never gotten a space to express it. And that was the first time I got into it, and I just loved it. And thereafter, it was just awards for the writing that I did. And that's how I got into this journey.
I love hearing that. Thank you for the story. Thank you for saying that it started with a mistake. Yeah. And it's something that you then grew to love. It sort of shrink away. And I'm so glad she actually gave you feedback, because sometimes we don't get the feedback, and then we start, filling in the gaps in the narrative of what is really happening, and we talk ourselves out of things. But then I heard awards, Hazel. That's what I left with. Awards, for writing. Were you particular about what platforms you wanted, to make sure your work appeared on, and why it mattered that it is those platforms?
Absolutely. After I made the many mistakes, and by the way, just for the record, I'm actually dyslexic. So that was actually quite a hard journey overcoming that and the shame of that. But Modesta, I've been very intentional about the platforms that I use, or the approach that I use in terms of the platforms that I use. Because earlier on, I realized that being visible everywhere doesn't equal to being influential anywhere. So at the beginning of my leadership journey, I chose platforms that forced clarity. So writing became my primary tool. I started off with long pieces like blogs and editorial pieces that were published. These actually allowed me to articulate my thinking properly, what I stood for and what problem I was actually trying to solve. And also because my work connected broader systems, I could not at that moment chase reach. I was actually filling a role where I was amplifying my voice because I needed to be understood before I could be amplified. And as I grew in the work, I became more selective. So I leaned more into media and publishing that had depth and credibility rather than speed. So I chose conversations that were nuanced, like podcast curated panels, because my work sits at intersections of leadership and narratives and systems. That kind of work doesn't translate well when you use sound bites. Sorry, I needed platforms that deeply respected the complexity of the message that I was sharing. So it's a long process that I went through. But now where I am now, I think of platforms that I use from a longevity point of view. So I ask myself, will this still matter if I step back? And that's why the work that I do lives within institutions and publications. That's how I've established the work that I do. So every platform choice I've made has been about alignment with my leadership stage, with the kind of impact I want to have, and with the responsibility that comes with being visible, not just being visible for the sake of it, but for purpose. That's how I got to where I am.
Hazel, you're taking us to school. And this is why I love having communications expert on the platform. I took, it had to be clear, had to be authoritative. It had to be institutionalized. And if I were to step back, I wanted to make sure there was longevity. Clearly, you thought it through from the very beginning a whole lot more than the rest of us just show up and like, where are my people? And, I'd like to communicate with them. So you thought your visibility through. And what was that quote you said earlier? You're saying that, you don't do visibility for visibility's sake, right? Because you have to be mindful about influence. You're on the far left of how intentional you've been about your visibility and how strategic you've been, and about your impact. And then there are people on the far conservative right who would say, why does visibility even matter? I think it's superficial, or should my work speak for itself? Or maybe some people might even, and I'm talking about leaders here, some leaders might even think, where I'm at is enough. Do I even have to have a place beyond what my current box that I'm in? What would you say? Why does global visibility actually matter, especially for leaders who want to shape ideas, policy, culture?
So that's a very good question. And I know I come off as we're going back to school, but I think we kind of miss what visibility truly is in its essence. I think we've seen social media and the rise of social medias and stars from social media, and we think that's visibility. Yes, and for a certain market, but not necessarily for global leaders. And this is why intentionality for me is absolutely critical. So the first thing to say about visibility, that it's often misunderstood. It's still treated as promotion or self-branding or just noise. But in reality, visibility is about who gets to define the story. So in this global economic ecosystem that we're living in, that we have, visibility actually determines whose ideas travel, whose leadership is trusted, whose narratives shape the institution's policies, perceptions. So when leaders are visible beyond their immediate context, so wherever you are in terms of what it is that you do, your work may be impactful, but it remains contained. And in the absence of your voice or their voice, it doesn't mean the absence of a narrative. There is a story there. It simply means that the story is written by somebody else. So if you don't fill in that gap and tell your story and tell your narrative, somebody else will do it. And it's usually somebody who's far removed. When we see it in the African context, that we don't write our stories, other people end up writing our stories for us. So that's why I don't see visibility as an option. And I don't see it also as an ego. I see it as an infrastructure, especially from an African context. It's a system that allows ideas to move across borders into decision-making spaces without even the strongest work struggles and influences in terms of scale. So that's why it's very important. But I just wanted to also highlight an important thought that visibility shouldn't be static. It should evolve with maturity. And I suppose we'll actually go into this conversation in terms of how, as a thought leader, you can actually move with the different types of visibilities.
I actually want to be taken to school, especially because there is a lot of hype. Especially because there's a lot of hype online, a lot of hype in social media. I probably contributed to that hype for my audience as well. So it would be amazing, right, to have this communications expert speak to us. And so please don't shy away. If you're going to mention frameworks, you're going to mention steps, you're going to mention a process, please do. Because, well, first of all, my interest just got piqued. What are the different types of visibility? And what is this maturity you're talking about? What is visibility stage 1, stage 3? Please explain to us, because I have a feeling, I'm going to go off into a story. We're talking about something with my daughters, and it was something about either drinking water or putting moisturizer on. Bear with me. I'm going somewhere with this.
With you.
And, it's just been a thing. Just, why do I have to keep telling you about this? It makes a lot of sense. You need this work. And we were either speaking or reading something about just how important water is, what it means to your organs. And my eldest got it. She sounded it back the way she understood it. And the younger one said, Mom, when Jed gets a thing, she locks in, then she'll do it. Before that, there's no parenting, there's no talking, there's no discipline, right? So we're talking about some people shying away or finding, visibility superficial, and maybe because there's been a misunderstanding. So if you can, this episode, help us really understand what we're dealing with and how then to go about it. Oh my goodness, you would have reached so many people.
Thank you, Modesta. And I just want to just really emphasize that the type of visibilities that we have been exposed to is great, but not if you want to be strategic, not if you're in as a global leader. Yes, at some point, but you have to be intentional. So there are 5 types of visibilities which are important to embed as a part of your growth in terms of your maturity when it comes to your leadership stages. So the first one is a narrative visibility. This actually shapes your story. So you come out and you tell your story, and that's how you get people to start resonating with you, start seeing you and understanding your story, where you're from. Exactly what we do with Mawa Bio magazine. That's the whole idea, to share their narrative story. And then the next visibility is credibility visibility. This builds trust. Then I'll go into more details with this. Then we have institutional visibility. This is the type of visibility that opens doors for you. Then we have strategic visibility. This creates alignment for you in the high corridors of power. Then we have collective visibility. This is now visibility that extends your circles. Then we have legacy visibility, which ensures that the work that you do outlives what you do. So with that, we've got 4 stages of maturity in terms of your leadership stages. We've got your emerging leaders. These are the newbies, us who are coming into the scene. So at this stage, visibility is really about clarity. So for emerging leaders, they don't really need mass platforms. What they need is spaces that allows them to articulate their thinking clearly, to be understood accurately. And this is where the narrative and credibility matters the most. So this is the type of visibility that matters the most. So this comes in the form of writing, speaking, contributing to thoughtful conversations, and the best platforms to actually use for this would be things like LinkedIn, your long post essays, Substacks, newsletters, blogs, podcasts. Be guests on podcasts. Don't hold podcasts at this stage. And these platforms will allow these leaders to practice their articulating and redefining and refining who they are. So that is the first leadership phase, and this would be my recommendation in terms of visibility. So it would be narrative, visibility, and credibility. So the goal here is clarity, voice, and to gain early legitimacy in your sphere of influence. Then the second stage would be for established leaders. So as established leaders become more established, the center of gravity actually shifts for them. So move closer to their systems. It's less about telling the story and more about presenting where decisions are being shaped. So institutional and strategic visibility becomes very critical. So their voice shapes the narrative and informs decisions in certain spaces. So being spaces like advisory spaces, policy conversations, serious media, that would be the places where they'll need to be. And for them, the best platforms for them would probably be in policy forums and consultative national at board level consultative processes, bilateral conversations, multilateral conversations, boards, and that kind of stuff. That's where they would make most of their influence in terms of they need to be strategic and visible in that sector. And then the third is the influential leader. So at a certain point, visibility kind of stops being about the individual altogether. So you've achieved being an emerging leader. You've now been established leader. So it's no longer about you. So influential leaders are now use visibility to now extend their circle. At this stage, they're now shaping the narrative at a more broader level and create spaces for others to be involved, to be heard. They don't just participate in forums, they build them, convene them, they curate them. And at this stage, visibility becomes more collective, and influence shows not in how often the leader appears, but in what shifts because they are present. So the best visibility style or type for them will be more collective visibility or advanced narrative visibility. So advanced is no longer Modesta talking about how she became the successful entrepreneur and she worked from her mother's garage, but it's now how she's influenced policy, how she's shaped this, and what influence that has had in terms of the community. That is now the type of visibility and the storytelling, for lack of a better word, our conversations should be happening at that level. So we kind of see these spaces that provide that kind of narrative, or the spaces that amplify this type of visibility is more of your TED Talks, your international summits, conferences and global media commentary columns and along those lines. And then the last is there now the legacy leaders. This is where Modesta you are. We kind of fall into now. So at this is the final stage. And in legacy leadership, visibility becomes a bit more quieter because, but more durable. It's embedded in institutions, ideas, systems that continue to operate without our constant presence. So books, curriculum, platforms, organizations, things that carry the thinking forward, even when the leader kind of steps back. So legacy, visibility, and institutionalized visibility will be the best. So books, long-form publications, established institutions, and foundations will be actually absolutely phenomenal for this. And the reason why I'm very particular about this, at least chronology of building your legacy or your visibility, is because Modesta, you and I have done MBA. And one of the things we've gone through academia actually, and one of the first frustrations that I've come through with my MBA was the fact that I write about African women, and it's so difficult to get reference citations. Sometimes you think, okay, somebody else has written this, and no shade to those that have written, but in terms of the context and what I want to articulate, we don't have enough African women writing about themselves. It's always somebody who's far removed, somebody who's done research from a certain angle because they wanted a certain outcome. Why not create that pool for ourselves? It was a bit difficult for me to get female writers who wrote particularly on that subject. I actually got more white male, who were in Yugoslavia, somewhere writing about that. So that's, I think, in terms of creating, we want to get to that point in terms of visibility. So it's not always that we have to be in front of the camera. We have to be on TikTok. No, legacy is about visibility, is about much stronger and more sustainably in the background.
Wow. Wow.
Mm.
Wow. Wow. And what I'm hearing is we're going from the gap, maybe your presence in spaces, which is necessary, to the gap, like now, the systemic gap. We need to step in and fill. The onus is on us, because you said earlier that if you're not shaping narratives, somebody else is. They then
Absolutely.
influence, and it's those ideas that will be pervasive in that culture, in that time, in that
Mm.
industry. This is so critical.
There's no vacuum. If we don't step up, somebody else does. And that has been happening for so long,
Yeah.
that in where we've been absent, other people have come in and filled and told a totally different story, that is far removed from who we are. And I'm speaking from an African perspective. I'm sorry, I'm passionate about our continent. So I'm
Oh, I
speaking from an
understand. I
African
understand. And actually, this is just such a brilliant place to move into then, because Africa is frequently spoken about, of, to, at, right? So now we see from what you just said just how important intentional visibility does to
perspective.
shift power, to create the authority,
Mm-hmm.
right, to
Absolutely.
the visibility, the voice, and the authority, to be listened to, deferred to, and have your ideas shaping
Mm-hmm.
our world. So
Mm.
coming back to you, just how I know how passionate you are about Africa, really owning, and I know we're very similar, because you can be so passionate about something, you're not telling the entire continent the onus is on you, it is your responsibility, you cannot be an African
Oh,
and not then, you need to be globally visible, your voice needs to be heard. But
you
isn't
know me too
so?
well.
But my question is, what is
Mhm.
at stake if we don't do this? Because one of the things that I said at the beginning, somebody might say, I'm just happy with my thing. Why do I have to take on this clarion call? It's now take up arms. No, maybe not take up arms. I don't want to use that expression, right? And be rallied into this whole thing. I want this to come home. I want somebody to understand what is at stake if African leaders are not globally visible and taking up the space and authority to define narratives and to promote ideas, and not just
Mhm.
Africa, but for this world.
So, in perhaps just to answer the question in a very short way, is what's at stake is a repetition of the last 400 years,
Oh,
probably even worse,
oh, okay.
because times have changed. That is what is at stake.
Yeah.
So, it's not just us, it's our future legacy, it's our continent, a repetition of the last 400 years.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so,
Own nothing. We own nothing.
yeah.
We can't say anything. We
Yeah.
can't go anywhere. Our children basically have to constantly be subservient. And I'm unapologetic about that, because that's the reality of what we have lived in the last 400 years.
Mm.
That's what's at stake.
And what this also brings me to is the fact that media has been a multiplier.
Mm.
Whatever media has existed over the past 400 years, however information and persuasion moved. And just as it has so far more adversely than positively affected how Africa is viewed, right? And therefore how the rest of the globe, for lack of a better expression, does business with Africa, right?
Yeah.
It
Yes.
can also be a multiplier for good. So how then do you think we can leverage media? And of course, I'm thinking digital, but also traditional media, social media, to shape our authority and expand our reach as global African leaders.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very, very crucial question that you have asked. For starters, media has dismantled monopoly on legitimacy.
Mm.
So historically, media decided who was credible, whose ideas mattered, whose leadership was global. Today, media no longer has a single gate. It's now an ecosystem, and we no longer need permission to show up at any of those gates. As global leaders, we can now publish directly. We can speak in our own voices and on our own platform. Like you've created your own platform, we're able to build our own audiences without institutional permission. Unlike the traditional or prior the advancement of media, through media, it's shortened the distance between leaders and the audience. So we can now speak directly directly to our audience. We can contextualize the work in real time. We can instantly respond to misinterpretation or fake news. We can correct that instantly, unlike before. Media has also made narrative a leadership skill. So in the current landscape, leadership isn't just about action, it's about making meaning. So media has elevated things like storytelling, framing, language, coherent ideas. So we have access to that, and we're able to do that creatively. But also it's also enabled credibility to travel much faster. So now, if you drop Modesta Mahiga's name now, it's like everybody's on top of it, because your reputation precedes you, because we've seen you online, we know your story, you've built this network, there are testimonies that are coming from different parts of the world. You are global. So that's what media has done for us. It has also expanded who gets to be seen as a leader, and then also collective visibility. So I'm able to bring other people on board, like you're doing with this particular platform. You're bringing so many women, voices that we would have never known before. You're bringing them on board to be heard, to be seen. It's the same concept we're also doing with as Maua Bio magazine. We're bringing women from different parts of the world, different corners of the continent, making sure that they're heard, their voices are heard, they're seen as thought leaders, and they're also shaping the narrative of the landscape that they're in. That is the most brilliant part in terms of what media has done in shaping this global leadership.
So powerful. So powerful. Yet, because I was about to say, I'm sure, from when you started till now, people have won over those who were on the fence, or those who didn't quite see what's the hype. This is just the latest thing, and I've done business, or I've worked, and things were fine. Yet there may still be people who are not so convinced, or maybe convinced but reluctant.
Yeah.
And more often than not, when we were speaking before we started airing, I said that before 70% of my clients were women and 30 men, but now it's the other way around. As soon as we refocus, rebranded to Authority Global, we have 70% of our client base as men and or institutions led by men that are interested in distinguishing themselves and their organizations as global authority. Just that, whether it's the word global or it's the word authority, or it's about positioning, competitiveness. I don't know what it is, but I've seen a wide gap, and it's not a talent gap. Right, between men and women. So despite talent, despite impact, there's African women are still under-recognized globally.
Oh, that's a pain point.
It is, and before going into what they should do, maybe we should just give them a platform and ask, as a woman who interviews, right, both for your publication from Maua Bio magazine and for the podcast, and you interact with them in so many other different ways. Why do African women struggle with visibility, do you think? And maybe I should just add the next layer to this question. And what systemic or internal barriers do you feel are at
that's such a critical question, because this is the reason why we do the work that we do, because African women are left behind so much, and the gap between the next level and women is and African women is so wide. But through the many interactions that we've had, the surveys we've conducted, and just chatting with women in various spaces where they've been vulnerable and been able to articulate themselves, and we've gotten quite a lot of feedback. The reason why African women, and just broadly, struggle with visibility is often because it comes with punishment and with no protection. So for many African women, being visible has historically meant exposure to social backlash, moral judgment, cultural policing, sometimes accusation of being arrogant or disrespectful, or forgetting your place. I've personally heard that many times on my journey. So many women learn earlier on that being seen is an invitation to correction. So they'd rather stay quiet and safe. But in addition to that, we are also socialized to contribute, not to claim. So we are raised to carry responsibility without recognition, to lead formally without a title, to to serve without the spotlight. So we are kind of praised for the sacrifice and the endurance and the humility, but not for authorship or ownership or authority. So over time, this has created a really deep internal conflict within women. And I often get this question: I can do the work, but should I be seen doing it? And I've also personally struggled with this. So I can do the work, but I don't want to be seen because I'll have judgment or I can't own it. And another layer to that is that their competency is normalized and not celebrated. So you'll hear statements like, so when they lead, for example, it's seen as it's just what women do, or she's managing, or she's helping. It's not seen as leadership. It's not seen as innovation. It's not seen as excellency. It's seen as a helper. Some of them have come back and said to us, they carry the weight of representation. And I think we spoke about this earlier on, Modesta, where say visibility for African women is really individual. So when one woman becomes visible, she's often expected to represent the entire culture, speak perfectly, never make mistakes, be palatable to the audience. So you having a quirky way of doing or speaking is not acceptable.
Oh, many have tried over the years. They have tried. God bless them.
So that pressure alone creates fear of being misread, misquoted, misunderstood, and obviously the judgment and the backlash that comes to it. So they shy away from that and being visible, but not in control of our own narrative. So African women have been visible on a global space for decades, but often as case studies, beneficiaries, survivors, or symbol of resilience in Bogoto. You say that we've never owned our own narrative. So we're not seen as thinkers or architects or decision makers. So when visibility is offered, it's met with a lot of skepticism, where the question is, will I be heard or will I just be displayed? And that has been our narrative for so long. I mean, we supposed to talk about Sarah Batman, for example. I don't know if you know Sarah Batman and the humiliation, and nobody looked at it as from a point of GBV because somebody else wrote that narrative, And I pass my last point on this is that we were not taught to see visibility as leadership. So for many of us women, we were taught to equate leadership with humility, silence, letting others speak. And if we do speak out, it's framed as though we're being boastful, we're being egotistic, we're being disrespectful. So this is what has come out, and this is why a lot of women, and it's so entrenched, deeply embedded within us, Modesta. It goes far back, and you ask some of the barriers that actually inhibit us from showing up. It's so many. There's imposter syndrome, am I good enough, which is part of the list that I gave here. There's also an internalized misogyny, where we are taught when you get to a table, the man, despite that we are all equals, there's always this, you give men the respect, you give men the table, you give men, and yet we are all equals. There's also, we carry a lot of deep-seated trauma, unhealed trauma as women that we haven't dealt with, that inhibits us so much in terms of how we show up. But that's a conversation we can have it on a totally separate podcast. And I'm happy to come back and have that conversation.
I love how you've already booked yourself for another podcast. And
it's done.
You are most welcome. Absolutely.
Because there's so much to unpack here, Modesta.
No. This is good, because what I wanted to say to you is, or rather, maybe it's going to be a statement and then an ask. Why women struggle, because that was the first question. Why do you think women struggle? Before talking about, okay, so what do you do about it? But just why do you think? And you unpacked it. And I'm guessing a lot of people are nodding their heads right now, and it resonates with them, both women and perhaps men, because maybe they've heard the internal self-talk when the woman sounded like they doubted themselves, and the man is thinking, what do you mean? Right? Or maybe there are men who are listening were like, that's exactly the place of women. They shouldn't be. I don't know. There could be a mixed bag here. So what I wanted to say as a statement is, believe it or not, many of us actually have that self-talk. Us who are
Mm.
trailblazing, us
Yes.
who are global authorities and experts. That talk comes.
Yeah.
I understand, that talk is the talk of, first of all, the enemy of our soul. He has a lot to say to everybody.
Oh my God, here's a
But then, of
blabbermouth.
course, then he's helped by upbringing and society and culture and experiences, in the marketplace and otherwise. So those voices will never stop coming. Just in case there's some
Mm.
people want to wait for those voices before they step out,
Yeah.
they will never stop coming.
Mm.
But
That's
now
absolutely.
my question to you as the expert, what then do you do?
Mm.
I was in a context with you where somebody wanted to have their voice out globally,
Mm.
and they said, but they were still so traumatized about their experience that
Mm.
one of the things that you advised to them is healing, before they moved ahead. But I
Yes.
wonder, if we were to wait to heal every wound, we will probably run out of time before we get to raise our voices. So
Yeah.
how do you, with the chip on your shoulder, with the limp in your stride, how do you
Yeah.
still, I wonder, how can we still have more African women visible and taking their rightful places as
Mm.
authorities?
So I like what you just said now, where we had a conversation and I did say heal first. And I just want to reinforce that healing is not necessarily, it's not a straight journey. It's not a once-off journey. It's a lifelong journey. It is also an intergenerational journey. Sometimes all your generation needs is just to heal those wounds before you become the next generation, then takes on the baton of visibility. Because if we don't heal our nervous system as women, we're passing it on down to our children, who are still going to suffer the very same traumas, unknowing to them what it is. But if we deliberately start dealing with it, we then reproduce a better generation that's able to take on the mental to a certain point. So it's a phased approach. We're not rushing anywhere. What we want to do is to actually do the deep work so that the next 2, 3, 4 generation is able to bear the fruits. We may not see it in our lifetime, and that's the honest truth. But we'll see a better generation. But perhaps the first step that we can do, and I must say that this is a collective journey. It's not just me or Modesta or the women around us, but we as women, as a collective, where we need to start rewiring how we see and how we think of visibility. Perhaps reframe visibility as service, and maybe not self-promotion, because I know as a starting point, I know we struggle. And Modesta, you've been in interviews, like the hardest question is, tell me about yourself. I mean, nobody likes that question. And I think it's women thing. Men don't struggle with that. They don't. But because of where we're coming from, we kind of struggle with putting ourselves out there when the spotlight is on ourselves, because we have, like you're saying, we have so many voices. So visibility is not about drawing attention to yourself. It's about perhaps reducing the cost of access to those who come after us. So if we are able to heal and reframe the way we think of visibility, we allow the next generation to have easier access. Perhaps we can also start with controlling visibility, having controlled visibility and not exposure. And I've noticed how important this is through my Wabayan magazine, by helping women start little by little, telling their story, bringing visibility, instead of thrusting them out there before they are fully ready to occupy or own their story. Because understand, one of the things that we face is backlash. So instead of maybe even wanting to start a TikTok video, or I don't promote TikTok at the moment, but maybe we can start off by writing, by speaking in small platforms in nuanced environments. Create small safe spaces for us to then tell our stories. Create environments that are safe for women to make mistakes without being punished. So that would be the difference between controlled visibility and exposure. And perhaps separate the whole idea of humility versus invisibility.
Oh,
Because people always
what is that? Wait, what?
so separate humility and invisibility.
Hey, talk to me.
Hmm.
Unpack that for me.
So humility and invisibility are not the same thing, but we often confuse that. So African women, we are taught that speaking last is respectful, letting others lead is virtuous, claiming space, for example, is arrogance. But when we reframe it, so that is invisibility. But if we are now to reclaim our humility, or reframe what humility is. It's perhaps instead of speaking last, we speak clearly without apology. Your presence, you become present without dominating. This is why we're then called arrogant. We have authority without aggression. That is what humility is. You are authentic in terms of who you are. You show up in your fullness, but without riding over or sounding arrogant. Or humility is not invisibility, and that's what we've been taught. If you're invisible, that's humility. That is not humility. Yeah.
Hazel, what you've done for us here is bridge the gap between women leaders that are globally visible and active, and even that have come on this platform that are doing it, and possibly to other women leaders, it's, oh wow, look at her, and maybe it's admiration, aspiration, maybe it's just like, whoo. Happy it's working for you, but you shall never be me. What you've done is bridge the, okay, this is why visibility matters at all. And this is why it matters specifically to Africa. This is why it matters to you as an African woman. This may be why you're holding back, and you have permission to move forward. And I heard you when you were talking about healing. You're saying you're not necessarily going to sit at home and just go. No, you will be showing up, but as you're showing up, you're intentional about doing the work to heal. Because listen, when you said that you can pass on trauma into generations, so people are now traumatized, I don't even know why. I've gotten some feedback from my daughters. They've been carrying, and I know what that is. They just not dealing with it, right? And that is a reminder, like, Holy Spirit, help me. I need to work on this, because this must end with me. What you're saying is, I'm not saying sit at home. You're saying, okay, show up. And I love how you defined, like, humility is not invisibility. They're not the same thing. And thank you for actually saying this is what humility can be, even as you're showing up. So you're saying, because I think when you spoke about, the need to heal, which is really valid, some people are probably like, that's what I need. This is why I'm staying back. I need to heal first. And then, no, you can still show up while you're doing the work. And this is how you can show up in a way that affirms you, in a way that maybe initially this is a point where you're comfortable showing up. And I'm truly grateful because I think it's either I'm not showing up at all, or as in a personal choice, a person says, I'm just not going to do it at all, and then they just another one doing it, and they wonder if is that there's no in between, because there's this chasm. I don't know how to go across from where I am to being this African woman leader, and you've helped us understand why this is important, where we come from, and what it would take to get there.
Yes.
Now, you're a woman leader that is doing amazing things globally and just winning awards. Like, I think about every 3 months. Every 3 months, I'm celebrating you for some award somewhere. Like, it comes in, and I love how you built a community, a tribe. I don't know how big your tribe is, because you will get that. You will win that award. If you say you'll be nominated, next thing is, hey, we won it. And these are significant, national and Pan-African and global awards. Yet, Hazel, you're so spoken. You use soft power. You are about the collective. You're so self-aware. You're vulnerable. So if people were looking for a picture of a corporate woman who comes in and, in her stilettos and it is traumatizing everyone, you're saying, no, there isn't a picture of a global leader. There isn't a picture of an African woman leader standing in her authority and using her voice for impact. How do you reconcile the Hazel who is not really in people's faces? When you show up, Hazel, you're showing up to empower and hold the space to amplify others. This is what I've noticed with when you showing up in the media, when you show up on global platforms, you're there as an architect. You're there as an enabler.
Yes.
And so I wonder, is that the reason then why you're winning the awards? Or how, right? Because somebody else might think, I need to take on some persona, aggressive, and I'm out there and I'm loud. And for instance, a person like me, I will show up and speak, and I'm very opinionated. And I'm not winning the global awards, right?
Well,
Do you do it? How do you reconcile being who you are authentically yourself as a global woman leader, as a global African woman leader, and the fact that by being who you are, your
yeah.
personality, your experiences, your leadership style, your preference for communication, that
Yes.
translates to global recognition and awards.
Mm,
Just in case somebody thinks there's one type of personality and woman that shows up and that gets that and others don't.
mm,
Please help.
yes.
Long question, a lot of explanation between, but I want to get this from you because it is so fascinating to me. It is so wonderful to watch your work and see the globe recognize you for it too.
Oh, thank you, Modesta. And it's so interesting, hearing this from you. At least hearing this from the outside. So I think to answer that question, I don't think I ever got into the work that I do to win awards. I actually do stuff without that in mind at all.
I love that.
I don't at all. For example, the last award, a global award that we just got now from Prestige Awards. I'm allowed to mention names.
Mention all the names.
Okay, Prestige Awards.
You know why I want this? Because people need to know it is possible. So somebody's
Yes.
meeting you, she's like, oh, she's a sister like me, a person who, I recently introduced you to somebody and she said, we got along so well. First comment was we got along so well. So when somebody sees you, right, and hears from you and your humility and your accessibility, and then they hear of the things that you do and you have access to, I want them to understand they're not mutually exclusive. That it's possible.
Well,
Mention
that is
the
so
awards,
humbling.
please.
That is so humbling. Thank you. So this award that we got, the Prestige Awards, it is based in Europe. To be honest, I don't even know how we got nominated, but whoever did it was just seen. But what we know is we went through a really, really rigorous process in terms of the adjudication process, because there are things that we need to submit. But until today, we don't know who nominated or how they came across us. So for me, that is the power of the work that you do. The best marketing strategy and the oldest marketing strategy has always been word of mouth. So how you show up to people translates to the outcome of who you are going to be or what you're going to produce. For me, I think I've always, such an interesting question, Modesta, I think self-awareness, and it's not something that I grew up having. It's something that I recognize, or I'm growing into as I grow older and I'm mature. And I also sit around women who are wise, leaders that are wise as well, and I glean from them. I have a very humble approach towards the people that feed my soul, feed my career, feed my life. But self-awareness, I think, has been very crucial. I know my shortcomings. Like I said, remember when I started this podcast, I was saying, I know I'm dyslexic. I went through a period where, I went through the being called stupid, being called dumb, name picked, bullied, picked on, sidelined, nasty things done to me because of that. And I wasn't even aware that was the problem. To a point of realizing that, hang on, this is actually my superpower. It is not a curse. It is actually my superpower. In that dyslexia, there's an ability for me to weave things that maybe ordinary people don't see, or maybe ordinary people don't value. But it really, I say this with so much humility, but also with such pride and joy. Self-awareness for me is what has gotten me here, but also passion. And what I do is purpose-driven work. I don't do it for me. I do it for my people. I do it for my girls. I do it for my women. I do it for my continent, for the love of where I've been born, placed, raised as an African woman. That is what propels me. And I suppose this is what is being rewarded to me. And I'm grateful for it.
I was going to say, so what you said is deep, but what I want to also say to other people is it's not that deep and complicated. Truly being you, passionately, being authentic, serving passion, and you've gone global. So in case people wonder, what it takes, and I'm not saying, because you're very intentional, you're very strategic, right? You apply yourself, so it's not like, oh, just be yourself, just love what you do. No. You're not saying don't prepare and don't be intentional about it.
I think also authentic, because you mentioned something about we feel that if we're loud, if we're present, if we do this, we because Modesta has done it. Sorry, I'm using you as an example, Modesta, because I love you so much. Modesta has done it, and she bears fruit in this. I also need to be like that. There is no one size fits all character for 8 billion of us. All of us are uniquely different, and we all carry a gift within us. Be authentic, be yourself. You'll tap into that gift that aligns you with where you're supposed to be.
I love that. This is what I was going to say is the seed you need for you to really find your voice and to amplify it and to take your place globally. You already have it. That's what I was about to say. You're the seed. That's all you need. That's what I was going to say. It's not that deep, but I don't want to make it seem as if there isn't work to be done. But that's it. You just need you to show up. I'll tell you, I've tried many times to be the demure. Even my husband knows I will pop a vein, probably an artery, if I try to be it's just wives. He knows it. I mean, I'm sure the day I do it, I'll be like, what do you want? Like, what's going on? What's right? And so I came to accept myself because in many contexts, they told me this is the picture. You don't understand, Hazel. To be like me from birth in an African society, you cannot imagine the consequences from, upbringing to school, to jobs, to clients, and then to get to a place where I just embrace I am. By the grace of God, I am who I am. And, He works with that. And maybe I'm grateful to God. And maybe this is the message. Be you, right? But then be intentional then about taking that and all that makes you, and know that not only is there a space for you, there's actually a vacant lot that if you do not take up, the world will forever have lost it.
Yes.
Like no one can ever fill it, right? And because we're brought here on purpose to serve purpose, purpose will ask you to step out of your comfort zone and to take that place that only you can take. Right. And there's so many ways that you can equip yourself and get better as you go. So I am convinced, because I know my audience. I know the global leaders that listen to the Authority Advantage podcast. They're going to want to get in touch with you. How do they get in touch with you? Number one. Número dos is, what can they get in touch with you for? Because we don't want to overwhelm you.
So if you want to be featured in Mawabaya magazine, if you want to tell your story, Mawabaya magazine is a biographical magazine. So we only feature one woman in each edition, where we tell her story from A to Z. And ladies, it's for ladies for now, but we do have Chorus Revival for men as well who want to be featured on Chorus Revival. But specifically for Mawabaya magazine, this is your platform where you don't seek permission to tell your story. It really is for you. You can visit us on our website, www.maowabiomagazine.com, or you can email me at editor@maowabiomagazine.com. This platform is for you. Tell your story.
Hazel, I am so grateful to you making the time to come on the Authority Advantage podcast and for sharing what you have. So grateful to you, Hazel, and looking forward to our follow-up. I just love how you slotted that in ever so sweetly with a smile. But you're most welcome, and I truly would like to have that session. Hazel Namponya, thank you so very much for joining me on the Authority Advantage podcast. I wish you a wonderful rest of your evening. Global visibility determines whose voice is heard and whose leadership holds under scrutiny. As Hazel reminded us today, waiting to be discovered is not a strategy. Authority must be earned, proven, and intentionally positioned. If you're ready to strengthen how your leadership is seen and trusted globally, I invite you to book a strategy session with me through the show notes below. This is the Authority Advantage podcast. I'm Modesta Mahiga. Until next time.